The implementation of emergency measures in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. In the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic, many countries have put in place rules and regulations to minimize or stop the spread of the virus. These include compulsory quarantine or isolation, lockdowns or curfews, travel bans, compulsory face masks, bans on gatherings. International law recognizes that sometimes these temporary urgent measures are necessary to protect the public health and life during the uncertainty of a pandemic, and it should be possible to protect public health while avoiding violations of other human rights. International human rights law can guide policies that protect health and other rights. Under international human rights law, certain human rights may be limited in exceptional circumstances. There are two possible ways. First, derogations where there is a formally declared state of public emergency. Second, ordinary measure of restriction. Derogations where there is a formal public emergency. Some rights, such as freedom of movement, freedom of expression, or freedom of peaceful assembly, can be derogated from to a limited extent where there is a public emergency so severe that it threatens the life of the nation. The COVID pandemic has been such an emergency in many countries. Such a public emergency must be publicly and officially proclaimed. However, not every public disruption reaches this level of seriousness. Which derogating measures are permissible? Even in a public emergency, all measures taken should be non-discriminatory, strictly temporary, and strictly required by the situation. However, certain rights are never subject to such derogation, such as right to life, freedom from torture and ill treatment, fair trials, and freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. Ordinary measure of restriction. Some human rights protected under international law expressly provide for limitations regardless of emergency and the circumstances under which they may be restricted. When the situation can be adequately dealt by establishing restrictions, the declaration of the state of emergency and derogating measures should be avoided. Which restrictions are permissible? Based on international human rights law, restrictions must meet the following requirements. First, they must be provided by law in the country. Such laws must be sufficiently precise to allow people to decide how to regulate their own conduct and may not leave this completely in the hands of those in charge of implementing the laws. Second, restrictive measures may only be adopted for a limited range of purposes such as national security or public safety, public order, public health, morals, or to protect the rights of others. Third, the restriction must be necessary for the protection of one of the said permissible grounds. The restriction is not necessary if there are less interfering options to address the emergency purpose. Fourth, the restriction must be proportionate to the interest at stake. And fifth, the restriction must not involve discrimination. Consequently, domestic laws may allow the relevant authorities to issue some restrictive measures to cope with the COVID-19 pandemic. However, such restrictions must meet the tests of legality, legitimate purpose, necessity, proportionality, and non-discrimination. In any cases, measures must necessarily be subject to review by courts. Access to an effective remedy for victims of human rights violations must be available at all times, even during states of emergency. The law must not seek to limit the accountability of those carrying out responsibilities under emergency laws by providing a form of legal immunity. Please visit